Hey friends, welcome to the Raising Boys and Girls podcast. I'm Sissy Goff.
And I'm David Thomas.
And I'm Melissa Trevathan.
And we're so glad you joined us for this conversation. Let's dive in. Well, hey, Sissy Goff.
Hi, David Thomas.
We have not been in this room recording the podcast in a very long time.
So long.
So long that we weren't sure how to turn on all the equipment again.
We're hoping it's all on now. I might check the camera every once in a while just to make sure it's recording.
I have missed you in patches while you've been at Hopetown.
Well, I'm sorry she's not here today, that she had to go to the beauty salon because it's been so long she's been in town. We both look a little wild post Hopetown.
We're so happy you're back. And I want to even start there and ask you, as we think about stepping into an episode on emotional vocabulary, I want to ask you, what feeling describes your summer?
Well, since I have lived with 199 second through 12th graders, tired? No, that's just kidding. That's not a feeling. I do think my feeling would be grateful that I saw God move in some really profound ways over the course of the summer. And so I feel really grateful and tired.
You can do grateful and tired together.
What
That's
about
great.
you?
You know, I would say if I were going to pick just one, I'm really glad for having had a lot of rest this summer. And I think glad
now
that...
I feel envy. Just kidding.
We're all over the place now. And I think glad that I allowed myself to do that, because you and I as Enneagram 1s do not give ourselves permission to rest very well. So I think either I'm sold I was too tired to combat that and it just happened, or else there's some maturity on board, and it's like I am glad to know I could be reaching a place where I see the value of that differently.
Way to go, David. That's awesome.
Thankful for that.
Okay, well, I have a question back. As we're thinking about an emotional vocabulary, and we would love for those of you who are listening to think about this question for yourself. I want to know when and how you first learned to talk about feelings.
What a great question. I would say it was elementary school for me. It was early. And my parents get all the credit for that. So I think I've told on the podcast before, my dad was a lifelong educator. And so he was a teacher and a college professor. And for a term, he was the superintendent of schools in the small town where I grew up. And back in the 70s, what that meant was when people had an opinion or a complaint about a decision he would have made, they might tell you about that in the grocery store. Or, this will date the two of us back to the 70s, they would just look your home phone number up in the yellow pages and call your house at night and need to voice that complaint. And I have a lot of memories of watching my dad have these conversations. Like someone would approach him in some place and often would be fiery and emotionally charged in doing that. And my dad would talk with us in an age-appropriate way about what that felt like. If the conversation was heated and he felt scared in some moments or frustrated, and how to navigate that. And my amazing mother would get the residual of that at times, because if they saw her in the grocery store and didn't see my dad, they would send a message through her. And
Ooh, I would have liked to have seen your sweet mom's fiery response.
You would have loved to have watched my mom in some of those moments. Often, as was the case with my mom, she was very gracious and said, "Thank you for sharing." Some kind of gracious response like that. But on occasion when they would call while we were trying to have dinner and would call repeatedly, and the phone would just ring and ring and ring, and she would answer it and say, "We are excited to have dinner together as a family, and I'm excited for you to honor that."
Wow.
Yeah.
What a beautiful Barbara Thomas response.
Isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, some grace and grit mixed in there together.
That is for sure.
And then she would come to the table and talk about, I feel frustrated that, your dad's not at work right now and we're trying to be together. And so I think there just was this permission to name feelings, permission to be human, the importance of let's talk about these things. It's kind of right there in front of us. And I'm not going to pretend like I feel great about my dinner being interrupted and smile when I feel frustrated. So I remember sitting and watching a lot of that, particularly in that season, because when you're an elected official, there's just a lot to work with as a family. And so what about for you? When do you remember?
Well, emotional vocabulary was pretty different in my household, and we were not talking about feelings much, any of us. And it was just the three of us. Kathleen was not born until I was 16. And so I didn't talk about feelings really at all. And I remember I had some really sweet friends who had amazing parents who would try and talk to me a little bit and ask me questions. And I remember being so terrified and it being so hard. And then here I am graduating from college, still didn't know how to talk about feelings, and went to graduate school to be a therapist, which is hilarious because I probably had to learn what feelings were. And right when I moved to Nashville to go to grad school was when my parents separated and then divorced. And it was the hardest thing I'd been through to date. And so I started in counseling, which I was so grateful for. And I think it's the first place I learned. And probably as many of you who are listening feel the same way. You just didn't grow up doing it. And David, I remember where I was standing in my driveway of the house I lived in when my dad called me as they were getting divorced. Actually, this was post-divorce. And saying, as he still does when he calls me, "Hey, Sissy, how are you doing?" And I said, "I'm having a hard time." And he said, "Oh, when are you going to be good again? Every time that I used to call you, Sissy, that was your first response was, 'Dad, I'm good. When are you going to be good again?'" And I remember using every ounce of what was grown-up energy at the time saying, "I don't know." And it's still hard to say that out loud. And I think that was partly on me, was because I lived a life of pretending like I was good all the time. And no one ever taught my dad how. And probably part of why my parents got divorced is because neither one of them knew how to do that. And it makes me so thankful that we're talking about this now. And we're talking parents. Obviously, I was a grown up, and it's never too late to teach them, but there's so much you can do at whatever age your kids are to layer in an emotional vocabulary. It just couldn't be any more important.
Did you hear that? At whatever age.
At whatever age.
Such a great reminder of that. Thank you for telling that story.
Well, still learning how to talk about my feelings.
Me too. Aren't we all? Right alongside the kids we love.
Yes, yes. David, I had a bunkin' party over the weekend with the boys, and I am still finding Legos around the house 5 days later.
How did the bunkin' party go?
We had a blast. We have all these fun rituals at my house. The day begins with Whit heading to the cabinet, finding his Hiya vitamin bottle, giving it a shake, and saying, "More."
What a great and healthy way to start the day. I shake my Yeti and say, "More coffee, please." I should take some notes from your nephew.
Typical children's vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk growing kids should never eat.
That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered chewable vitamin. It's non-GMO, vegan, dairy-free, allergy-free, gelatin-free, nut-free, and everything else you can imagine.
Hiya is sent straight to your door, so parents have one less thing to worry about. And Hiya just launched an awesome new collab. The same multivitamin that more than 1 million kids and parents love are now available in Barbie Pink with a limited edition Barbie unboxing experience, including Barbie bottle and Barbie stickers. I also recommend checking out their new kids probiotic and nighttime essentials.
We've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/RBG. This deal is not available on their regular website.
Go to hiyahealth.com/RBG and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults.
I'm so excited. We are beginning this Are My Kids on Track season by doing a deep dive into the emotional milestones and that great, solid, important foundation of emotional vocabulary that we are always talking about in some way.
Yes.
Whether we're talking about anxiety, whether we're talking about regulation,
Isn't
it
that the
is
truth?
like 101. And so it's just so important that we camp out here and thinking, as Sissy reminded us, whatever age your kids are, how could we help kids develop this really important emotional muscle? So, first thing I think is important to know, we're going to be jumping off and talking about stumbling blocks for girls, stumbling blocks for boys, building blocks for girls, building blocks for boys, all kinds of really practical ideas. But as we jump off and talking a little bit about some unique things specific to gender, I want to talk about a myth on the front side that
Okay.
I end up talking a lot about in my work, and that is the myth that boys have fewer feelings than girls. And there is just no science to back that up. What we do know with a lot of certainty is that girls do have more words. That
That's
we
for
know.
sure.
And girls have advanced abilities both to express emotion and to read emotions on others. So there are advanced abilities, but it doesn't mean that they have more feelings and boys have fewer feelings. And so I want to read something that's from the APA, the American Psychological Association, that I think is really important as we think a little bit about the boys we love and kind of jumping into talking about some stumbling blocks for them. And one of those that I think is important to note is that research shows that while boys begin life more emotionally expressive than girls, which is fascinating to me to have read that. I remember hearing that in grad school, but to reread that tendency wanes as boys get older. By age 2, they're less verbally expressive than girls, and by age 4, they're less expressive facially. Research on children from infancy through the school years reveals that mothers often expose baby girls to a wider range of emotions than baby boys and work harder to control their son's emotional volatility. Fathers step in to socialize their toddlers along gender lines at around 13 months, verbally roughhousing their sons and talking in more emotional terms with their daughters. As kids get older, both parents foster this rift by discouraging sons from expressing vulnerable emotions while encouraging such expression in daughters. So I think that's really important
So
data to lean
interesting.
into. I know. And to
Yes.
think about if that is to some degree instinctively happening on the front side of development. What's also in play as I think about boys and girls is that you share this great stat, and I want you to tell me if I'm remembering this correctly or not, when we teach on boys and girls, that at 16-month well visits with a pediatrician, boys on average are saying about 30 words, girls about 100.
Yes,
And
exactly.
that is a significant difference. So think on it. If she's got 3 times the words he does, it just makes sense that her emotional vocabulary would early on be more expansive. So alongside this data, that's just that reminder we're going to need to labor a little longer on behalf of the boys we love, because jump forward a few more years, and I talk a lot about how around 9 to 10, boys will begin to channel all primary emotions, fear, sadness, confusion, disappointment into one. And everybody listening knows what that one is. It's anger. And so if these processes are going on internally, in terms of how we socialize kids, all these different ways, it's just important that we not buy into that myth and just believe, well, he's just got fewer feelings. And so we just don't need to talk as much. We don't need to work as hard in that space. And the reality being he's got just as many feelings. He just doesn't necessarily know what to do with those. And he's going to intuitively begin to funnel those along the way into anger. So we're going to have to really press in. And then I would say that's a good transition into what I would say would be one of the biggest stumbling blocks for boys, and that's cultural messages. And so we are layering on one more layer to this equation by all the different ways that I think culturally we encourage boys to hold things in, where I think we invite girls to share more of their experience. And where I think that can lead is you've heard Sissy and I talk so much about how boys will spend so much time avoiding feelings and girls will over-identify with their feelings. So we just can't be paying too close attention because, I would invite you to think about that classic phrase of man up. I think somewhere in that declaration or that charge at different points, whether we're aware of it or not, we're inviting boys to stop having feelings, just kind of buck up and move on. And so I want us to even think about what we're saying sometimes when we're saying that, or even, the language that I think we commonly culturally use of just, I'm having a breakdown. I don't know why I'm breaking down right now. And think on it, that has a negative connotation. Like if the car breaks down, that's not a good thing. And so it's this sense of if I'm crying, if I'm feeling deeply, that's not a good thing. That I think boys really lock into that sense of understanding. That's what happens when we have big feelings, certainly in a public space, as opposed to what's happening is I'm breaking open, and that's a good thing, always. I talk a lot about how boys
I love
swing.
that. I've never heard you say that, breaking down or breaking open.
Yes.
That's so good.
Well, I think it fits within that thing I talk a lot about in Strong and Smart of just, boys swing between suppression and eruption. I'm either holding it in or exploding, but I can't get to that healthy middle ground of expression, which is breaking open sometimes. And so all of that shared to say, I want us to pay really close attention to the ways we're socializing boys and the messages that are coming at them as I think about big stumbling blocks for boys. Okay, what about for girls?
That's so good, David. That's so good. I love hearing you say all of that. Well, for girls, and by the way, we are mentioning one stumbling and one building block for each milestone. We have more than that listed in the book. And so if you want a deeper dive on any of this content, we got two really great options. One is we have a course that we link to that you can go to our website. You can go to our social media. There are links where we're doing a much deeper dive there and in the book in both places. And then we always are trying to give more information on social media too. But those are two places in particular.
And we've got a great discussion guide that goes with the course. So you could do an even deeper dive if you want to watch that content instead of reading. There's a great tool there too.
Absolutely.
Thank you for remembering to mention that.
Yes. So I think for girls, and interestingly enough, I would say this was definitely my biggest stumbling block, but thinking about 30 years of counseling girls, I feel like this has become even more entrenched when we should be moving the opposite direction because of cultural messaging. It's different, but I believe the pressure to please is the most significant stumbling block for girls. And you talking about those statistics, I read a study by Tara Chaplin out of the Department of Psychiatry at Yale School of Medicine, and she showed that girls internalize their emotion more than boys. And when they do display emotions, they're more positive emotions. Girls, I believe, as a result, have higher rates of anxiety and sadness, but outwardly, they display more cheerfulness and joy. And boys, on the other hand, everything you just said, are more likely to show anger and aggression. But the interesting thing that I really love, and I think it's our space to step in and teach them something different, is that is only true when they're away from home. That in the presence of strangers, it is much more significant. And I would say not just strangers, but acquaintances and friends and teachers. I mean, that pressure to please is so significant. And also of note is adolescent girls have higher levels of shame, which I certainly believe is true. And I read another study from the Scientific American that talked about how women smile more often and longer than men.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? So it is entrenched early and it sticks. That need to please. And you all, I think if I were going to say, I mean, we know girls are twice as likely to deal with anxiety as boys. And I think if I had to say the three primary reasons that girls are anxious, obviously we know technology is a piece of it. I think parenting, with the best of intentions, parenting styles are a significant piece of it. And the third, I would say, is the pressure to please. And just the pressure that girls are under today. And so I think that is part of why I called the book for little girls Braver, Stronger, Smarter, because every girl of any age that I've ever met who's anxious is really kind and really thoughtful and really conscientious. All the things you've heard us say a million times. But out of that great conscientiousness, they don't want to say, I felt really disappointed today. Maybe sadness. I feel like joy, cheerfulness, gladness, grateful, happy, those are all great. They'll sometimes cross their toe over the line into sadness, but disappointment, frustrated, certainly angry. Those are such hard emotions to get to for kids for girls, because I think there's this sense of, are you going to still like me? Are you going to still want me around? And that girls vacillate between, am I too much or am I enough? So much of why they feel that way has to do with their inner emotional life that they're not talking about with other people. They just feel so much pressure. And so I think we want to be aware of doing something different. And I'll come back to that in the building blocks. Will you talk about the first building block for boys?
Yes, but I just have to say that's so good. I'm glad you talked about that.
I just hate it for girls. It breaks my heart. And perfectionism, I mean, all of the rates. I mean, I just am seeing it. We know statistically the rates are going up, but I'm certainly seeing it in my office too.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question. What's your favorite time of day?
Maybe about 8 p.m. when the day is winding down.
Okay, well, mine is mornings. Breakfast is my favorite meal of the day. I could eat it 3 times a day.
No one loves a breakfast taco more than you.
That is for certain. And we are headed to Texas next week where breakfast tacos rain down from the sky. But if I'm home making breakfast, my closest companion is Our Place. I use the Always Pan 2.0 more times a week than I can count.
Me too. I cook more because I love their products and they don't clutter up my cabinets like my old pots and pans did. I also love that Our Place is a mission-driven and female-founded brand that makes beautiful kitchen products that are healthy and sustainable.
I love that Our Place is healthy and PFAS-free versus the industry. Most of today's nonstick pans contain PFAS, also known as forever chemicals, which are under increasing global scrutiny for their impact on the environment and on our health.
And did we mention they're beautifully designed in beautiful colors that feel like art objects and elevate any home and that make you feel creative in the kitchen?
They have so many options for cookware and appliances. Find out why Our Place has 75,000 5-star reviews on their award-winning products, and they've been mentioned in the New York Times, Bon Appetit, and more.
Go to FromOurPlace.com and enter our code RBG at checkout to receive 10% off site-wide. That's FromOurPlace.com, code RBG.
Our Place offers a 100-day trial with free shipping and returns. Well, if I were to jump to a building block for boys, I would say that building block would be exposure. Just as much exposure as possible. I talk so much about how boys need to see that emotions reside in the life of a man. Like, they so often will get to see evidence of that on the females in their lives. They'll get to sit front row and hear their moms talking a lot about feelings, maybe their female teachers, but not as often the adult males in their lives. So I think we can offer exposure through characters and books and movies and television shows, and watch for, as we're engaging stories in different ways where adult men are making connections in that way, and hit pause on the screen or put your hand in the book and talk a little bit about what he observed and what it was like for that particular character to name their feelings in that way. And I think not just in fiction, but in real life too. Like, I want boys to get to sit front row and hear their dads at dinner time saying things like, I felt really nervous today. I had to give a presentation to the board of directors and I didn't feel as prepared as I wanted to. Or I think I said something that out of frustration that really hurt a coworker's feelings, and I want to circle back tomorrow and check in on them. Like, all this opportunity for boys to see this is what it looks like to be an adult male in this world and have feelings, and to, as I talk so much about, name and navigate that. And so as many opportunities as possible, I think, are so important.
It's so good.
Yeah. What is a building block that comes to mind for you for girls?
Well, I think it is, I love that she is expressing emotions at home. It's hard. It's hard on you as parents. I certainly know that. And the amount of times I have sat with parents who say, well, we went to the parent-teacher conference, and the teacher said, if every child in my class acted like your daughter, and the parent says, and that is not who she is at home, she needs a safe place to not be that person. She certainly does. And we need to help her learn she can start to express that outside of the home. And so I would say, I want you to start. We'll give a little mini building block before we get to the real one. I don't think we can give her space to feel a full range of feelings if we're not examining our own perspective on feelings and our perspective on feelings and femininity. I mean, to your point about masculinity, because I think so often we're trying to teach girls to be kind and respectful and polite and gracious. And we're talking so much about wanting women to feel empowered and strong and like they're fierce, but we're not translating that to teaching it to girls in our homes. And so when you think about who you really want her to grow up to be, and moms, I would say, where are you playing catch up now? Are you learning, like I am, to have boundaries and be kind at the same time? Because if you're still learning that, think about how do you back it up and start it with her now at whatever age she is. It's why we talked in the Raising Boys and Girls series about teaching girls to have strength and kindness at the same time. It can be both things.
Yes.
We do not want her highest priority to be politeness. Politeness isn't authentic to who we are. We can be kind and have strength. And so teaching her to be both things. And I would say, think about what you were allowed to be growing up. What were you even taught to think it looks like to be kind in this world, to be a woman in this world relationally? What can it look like for you to teach her authenticity and kindness? Because I think we live in a world where we value one or the other. And it can be both for her. And so to think about, okay, I have a couple of questions. I want you to think about what would it look like for you to give your daughter room to be angry. In doing that, not to tear others down, because I think it's easy to jump to being critical of somebody else when we're angry, but that we can be angry and it's just anger. I have a mom, I don't know if you've even heard about, I have to look up the name because I'd never heard of these. In different cities, they're popping up something called Smash City Rage Rooms. Have you heard about this?
No.
Well, I have a brilliant mom who took her adolescent daughter, which we know teenage girls feel a lot of rage sometimes, to this place. And her daughter was struggling with some friends, and there was a sledgehammer, and there are plates, and there are wooden things, and they just can break whatever they want. She and her best friend went together.
No way.
Yes. Yes. And her mom showed me, she videoed some of it and showed me the video of her daughter just going after something with a sledgehammer. But I think what a beautiful way that this mom was saying, your anger is okay. It is completely okay for you to be angry. You're not hurting anyone else out of that. And I think for us to have responses to them, I mean, not in the moment, because sometimes they just need to say whatever it is. We need to get away from them. Sometimes we need to give them a consequence. But to circle back and to say things like, I can tell you were really angry before. Will you tell me more about that? To have curiosity. Can you imagine growing up, and ladies especially, can you imagine growing up and someone saying to you, your anger is actually good? And I want to hear about it because, well, we'll come back to what our emotions point us to. So what would it be like to just teach her to be mad and not to hurt other people, and that she can give words to that, and that you are okay with her, and that you can sit with her and hold that anger? What would it look like for you to give her space to be disappointed and not try to make her feel better or see the silver lining? That's so often where we jump in. What would it look like for you to just sit in the sadness with her and offer empathy? I have another mom. I loved this. So this was when, this is funny because we were talking about this just in a casual conversation yesterday, and neither of us could get to the name of the movie with the vampires and the werewolves. Twilight. I used to have so many conversations about Twilight. If you remember Twilight, you might have been a kid when Twilight was out. It took place, I don't remember the state, but in a city called Forks. Do you remember this?
Don't remember.
Yeah. Well, I remember because I had this really wise mom who she told me, she came in with her daughter one day and she said she's having a terrible day. And I'm so glad we had an appointment. They came today and she said, she reached out to me from school and said, I'm falling apart. Can I come home? And her mom picked her up from school and said, is this just a day we need to move to Forks? Because Twilight was her favorite movie. She was an older teenager, by the way. And the daughter felt so loved and so understood. I think they went to get lunch. It was like a personal day for her. And there's a girls' school in town that we have a lot of kids who go there, and they have something called personal days. It's not a sick day. You get to take a personal day. And I wish we could all implement personal days for kids. Again, that is to say, I'm going to give you space to feel sad and not to move. I can think of a friend who lets herself be sad for 5 minutes. I wish we could relegate our sadness to 5 minutes. It doesn't really work. But to give kids space to feel. And now I want to say we are going to have a really beautiful, thoughtful conversation coming soon with 2 of our counselors from Daystar. And Jenny, who works with a lot of girls, is going to talk about how often girls get stuck. We will come back to that. I feel like I'm having more parents recently who are saying things like, yes, but if they have words to describe it, if I help them find their way to words, isn't that going to become an excuse? Or isn't that going to mean they're going to get stuck? That's a different milestone. And that's the milestone of perspective, which we're going to circle back to. And also the milestone of resourcefulness, which we want you to listen to that episode too when it comes out. We've got to start with vocabulary. For all of them, you talk about this so much, but vocabulary is a building block for healthy relationships, healthy functioning in the world, healthy coping, so many things. And I really believe if we could help our girls and our boys find their way to an emotional vocabulary at whatever age they are, we're going to offset the skyrocketing rates of anxiety, depression, suicidality, all of those things. It is so important. And I alluded to this earlier, but if I were even to go back to me standing in the driveway, trying to name a feeling with my dad, that journey of learning how to talk about my feelings for the first time not only helped me discover more of who I am in the world, but it helped me know God in so many deeper, richer ways. That's what our feelings are meant to do, is to point us to the heart of God, to point us towards our need for Him, and to how much He loves us and He's with us in the emotions. And so the Psalms, we're going to talk about practical things, but the Psalms are a great place to take kids to help them understand the importance, not just that our emotions are valid, but that our emotions are important. And that's the heart of what we're wanting them to learn. So, okay, I'm talking enough. You give a practical takeaway.
Well, before I do,
this.
I just have to say, hearing you talk more, I'm just so excited about this season.
Me too.
And it reminded me, as you were saying what you were saying right then, we have an episode coming up with our friend, Dr. Chip Dodd, and he's going to talk more about, in that episode, what happens for us as people when we can't get there as adults, and how it gets in the way for us as parents when we can't. So much good stuff coming this season. I'm so excited about this.
I'm so excited about this season.
Me too. And where we're going to end every one of these episodes where the 2 of us are talking is with some practical ideas, as you mentioned. And we're going to throw out just a few, but if you want to go deeper, I think we have 8 to 10 at the end of every single milestone in the book.
Yes, we do.
So we'll just throw out some at this point. The one that I think I probably talk about the most, but I can't talk about enough, is the importance of a feelings chart. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to hold up not 1, but 2 versions. And if you're just listening, you've got to jump on raisingboysandgirls.com. And we have 2 versions, our what we'll call original, the greatest of all times version. And then we've got a taco version, because we talk so much about tacos on this podcast. And I think the taco version we've heard from a lot of parents of teenagers is a little easier one to work with sometimes. And I would say 3 quick things about the feelings chart. 1, I would say I want you to think about it the way we culturally think about the letters of the alphabet and how we have those up in all of our early learning environments, because we know as kids are learning the letters that form words and words form sentences. If they can see the letters, if that chart is hanging in the classroom, it just strengthens the connection. This is the exact same concept. If they can just see it, as we're talking about it, it strengthens the connection. And we can use this with kids who can't even read. We're going to point to the expression, name the feeling for them, and we believe it's so foundational. With teenagers, I think it turns, that classic question of how are you feeling or questions about their day, that feels like fill in the blank in the multiple choice. It's like, okay, I don't have to come up with it on my own. I'm just going to pick from these right here in front of me. So I think it makes those conversations a little more manageable. But I think lastly, it serves as a great reminder to us so that example I shared earlier, when we're sitting around the dinner table together, I'm remembering to fold in more emotional vocabulary into my reporting as I
Yes.
narrate my experience from the day in an age-appropriate way, knowing that all that learning is landing on the kids I love. More is caught than taught. So what would you say for a practical?
Well, I want to add to your feelings chart because thinking about girls need to please, I see girls land in happy, grateful, proud. No, they wouldn't say proud because that would be proud. So I want you to have them pick 3, not just one, because
Great.
I don't even want to call them negative emotions, but I think they would land on what is perceived as more positive. And we want them to learn to talk about the harder emotions to talk about. And what my practical takeaway is what you said, to name yours as you're passing it around the dinner table. And adolescents are going to roll their eyes. That's fine. Let them roll their eyes. Keep passing it around the dinner table as they're getting older. I also love when families do a rose, a thorn, and then a rosebud of something they're looking forward to. I think that's really sweet too, and can mix it up a little bit. And I think my practical would be, I just want you to be really thoughtful about making sure, try to say one emotion you're feeling a day. Just as simple as that is. I felt really sad when, and again, that it's not just the happy ones, but it's a full range of emotions. And if you need a feelings chart hanging up in your bathroom so you can check and remember the different words, I think we can get out of practice too, even of what the emotions are. And so name them, model them. And by the way, too, we have movies and books
Great reminder.
on Instagram that taught for different ages that are really rich emotionally. It's one of our highlights on Raising Boys and Girls on Instagram. And movies and books are a great place to stop off and say, hey, what do you think that person was feeling? Where we're teaching them empathy even in the midst of it, but we're teaching them to read someone else's emotions. Watching the news. We certainly have a lot of feelings that are showing up on the news in this season, whatever it is that you're watching, that we're talking about those regularly.
Yes. We've got good stuff ahead.
We do. We're grateful. We're excited. We can name all the happy feelings about how we feel about this season of the podcast.
But we're just so grateful you're with us.
Yes, thank you. David, what a team we have that we get to call friends who help make this podcast possible.
Amanda Young, our operations manager.
Chris Starrett, our engineer and producer.
Our management team at KCH.
And we are thrilled to be a part of the That Sounds Fun network.
Our music was created by the insanely talented Dave Haywood of Lady A.
And if this podcast felt helpful to you, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, all the things.
We are grateful for you and cheering you on always.